Jake Martinez stepped off the transport ship and looked around at the massive space station floating in orbit around Kepler 442b. The Galactic Institute of Xenobiology was bigger than anything he had ever seen. Silver towers stretched in all directions, connected by glowing bridges that pulsed with soft blue light. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at various ports, each one stranger than the last. Jake pulled his single bag over his shoulder and followed the crowd of beings toward the main entrance. He was one of only 12 humans accepted into the exchange program, and at 20 years old, he felt both excited and nervous about spending a full year studying alongside alien species. His parents had been worried about sending him so far from Earth, but Jake had dreamed of this opportunity since he was a child. The entrance hall was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to disappear into the distance above. Thousands of students moved through the space, and Jake tried not to stare at the incredible variety of life forms around him. There were tall, thin beings that looked like they were made of crystal, their bodies catching and reflecting the light in beautiful patterns. Other students had multiple arms, or moved on tentacles instead of legs, or floated through the air without touching the ground at all. Jake noticed how carefully everyone moved. The crystal beings stayed far apart from each other, as if they were afraid of bumping into anything. A group of insect-like students with 6 legs each walked in perfect formation, their movements slow and precise. Even the floating students maintained careful distances from walls and other beings. A voice echoed through the hall, speaking in a language that sounded like musical chimes. Jake's universal translator, a small device clipped to his ear, converted the sounds into English. All new students, please report to Orientation Hall 7 for species-specific briefings. Jake followed the signs to Hall 7, where he found himself in a much smaller room with the other 11 human students. They all looked as amazed and overwhelmed as he felt. A few were taking pictures with their communicators, while others just stood quietly, taking everything in. The door slid open, and a tall, thin being entered the room. It had 6 arms, purple skin, and large yellow eyes that seemed to glow softly. Jake's translator identified the being as Professor Keltar from Centauri Prime. "Welcome, humans," Professor Keltar said, his voice sounding warm despite coming from an alien throat. "I am Professor Keltar, and I will be your species coordinator during your time here. I want to begin by explaining some very important safety protocols that will keep you alive during your studies." Jake and the other students listened carefully as the professor continued. "Each species in this institute has evolved under different conditions, with different physical capabilities and limitations. What might be a minor inconvenience to one species could be fatal to another. For this reason, we have strict medical protocols that must be followed at all times." Professor Keltar activated a holographic display that showed the layout of the medical center. Any injury, no matter how small, must be reported immediately to the medical staff. Our healing chambers are designed to treat beings from over 300 different worlds, but proper treatment requires immediate response. In the past, students who delayed medical treatment for even minor injuries have suffered permanent disability or death. One of the human students, a girl named Lisa from California, raised her hand. "What kind of injuries are we talking about?" "Like, how minor is minor? Any break in the skin, any impact to bone or cartilage, any strain to muscle or connective tissue," the professor replied. "Even what you might consider a small scratch could become infected with bacteria that your immune system has never encountered. A bruise that seems harmless might indicate internal damage that could prove fatal without proper treatment." Jake found this hard to believe, but he nodded along with the others. He had played sports all through high school and had dealt with plenty of cuts, bruises, and minor injuries without much concern. But if the professor said it was dangerous here, he would be careful. After the orientation, Jake was assigned to his dormitory pod. The living spaces were designed to accommodate different species, so his pod was quite large, with areas that could be customized for different environmental needs. When he arrived, he found his 3 roommates already there. Zixith was one of the crystal beings Jake had seen in the entrance hall. Up close, Jake could see that Zixith's body was made of what looked like living diamond, with patterns of colored light moving through the crystal structure. Zixith's voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. "Greetings, human Jake. I am honored to share living space with you." Vorthak was completely different. He looked like a giant praying mantis, but with thicker armor and breathing apparatus that helped him process the station's atmosphere. His homeworld was one of Saturn's moons, and he needed a methane-rich environment to stay healthy. His section of the pod was sealed off with its own air system. "Welcome, soft skin," Vorthak said, his voice coming through a speaker system. "I have heard much about human curiosity." The third roommate was the most unusual of all. Quinn appeared to be made of a thick gel-like substance that held together in a roughly humanoid shape. Jake could see sparks of electricity moving through Quinn's translucent body, and when Quinn spoke, the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Human friend Jake, I am pleased to meet you. Your electromagnetic signature is quite interesting." Over the next few days, Jake settled into life at the Institute. His classes were fascinating, covering topics he had never imagined. He learned about species that lived in the vacuum of space, others that existed as pure energy, and some that experienced time differently than humans did. But what struck him most was how careful everyone was about physical safety. In the gymnasium, students exercised within protective force fields. Any activity that involved movement was conducted with medical teams standing by. The swimming pool had separate sections for different types of beings, with emergency systems that could instantly drain and refill the water if contamination occurred. Even recreational activities were heavily monitored. Jake watched a game that was similar to basketball, but every player wore protective gear that covered their entire body, and referees stopped the game immediately if anyone made contact with another player. Jake began to understand that most species in the galaxy were much more fragile than humans. The crystal beings could literally shatter if they hit something too hard. The insect-like students could lose limbs that would never grow back. Even minor injuries that humans recovered from quickly could be permanent or fatal to others. Still, Jake missed the freedom of movement he was used to on Earth. He wanted to run without protective gear, to play sports without constant medical monitoring. But he respected the rules and tried to adapt to this new way of living. After all, he was here to learn, and part of learning was understanding how different species survived in their own ways. 3 weeks had passed since Jake arrived at the Institute, and he was starting to feel more comfortable with his new life. His classes were challenging but exciting, and he had formed friendships with students from several different worlds. His roommates had become like brothers to him, each teaching him about their unique cultures and ways of thinking. Jake had also discovered gravitational disc, a sport that was popular among many species at the Institute. The game was played in a large spherical chamber, where artificial gravity could be adjusted in different zones. Players had to navigate floating platforms while trying to score points by getting a glowing disc into goal zones. The gravity would shift randomly during play, making the game both challenging and unpredictable. Most species played very carefully, using safety harnesses and protective gear. But Jake found that his human balance and reflexes gave him some advantages in the shifting gravity fields. He had joined a mixed team that included Zixith, 2 students from the Vega system, and a floating jellyfish-like being from the Outer Rim territories. On this particular day, Jake's team was playing against a group of advanced students who had been at the Institute for several years. The match was more intense than usual, with both teams scoring quickly as the gravity field shifted every few minutes. Jake was enjoying himself, moving between platforms with the kind of athletic confidence he had developed playing sports on Earth. The game supervisor was instructor Veltar, a mantis-like being with compound eyes that could track multiple players at once. Veltar was known for running safe games, always ready to stop play if anyone seemed to be in danger. Medical teams were stationed around the chamber, as they were for all physical activities at the Institute. Jake was positioned on a platform about 15 feet above the center of the chamber when the gravity field suddenly increased. From normal to about twice Earth gravity, most players immediately grabbed onto something stable and waited for their bodies to adjust. But Jake saw an opportunity. The opposing team's goal zone was on a platform just 10 feet away, and he was holding the scoring disc. Without thinking about it the way he might have back home on Earth, Jake bent his knees and launched himself toward the goal platform. For a moment he flew through the air exactly as he had planned, but the increased gravity pulled him down faster than he had expected, and instead of landing cleanly on the platform, he hit the edge with his shoulder and rolled awkwardly onto the surface. There was a loud pop as Jake's shoulder joint separated. He felt the familiar sensation of a dislocated shoulder, something he had experienced twice before during football games in high school. It hurt, but it was not the kind of pain that made him panic. He sat up on the platform holding his arm carefully against his body and looked around to signal that he needed a timeout. What he saw shocked him. Every single player in the chamber had frozen in place. Zixith's crystal body was making a high-pitched humming sound that Jake had learned meant extreme distress. The two Vega students were clicking their mandibles in what sounded like panic calls. The jellyfish being was flashing bright red, which Jake knew was a danger signal for their species. Forthak, who was playing from a protected booth due to his atmospheric needs, was gesturing frantically with all four of his arms while speaking rapidly in his native language. Even the advanced students on the opposing team had stopped moving and were staring at Jake with what looked like horror. Instructor Veltar was the first to react with action rather than shock. The Mantis being activated emergency controls that immediately locked down the gravitational fields and turned on bright medical lights throughout the chamber. "Medical emergency!" Veltar's voice echoed through speakers in the chamber and throughout the facility. "Catastrophic structural failure to human student. All players remain motionless. Seal the facility immediately." Alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Jake could hear the heavy doors to the chamber sliding shut and locking. Emergency barriers appeared around his platform, creating a containment field that was supposed to prevent him from moving and causing further injury. "Hey, it's okay," Jake called out, trying to reassure everyone. His universal translator was working, so he knew the other students could understand him. "It's just a dislocated shoulder. I'll be fine." But his words seemed to make things worse instead of better. Zixith's humming grew louder and more distressed. The crystal being's body was starting to show stress fractures, thin lines appearing in the diamond-like structure. Jake realized that Zixith might actually shatter from panic if this continued. "Nobody move," Veltar commanded again. "The human's limb has become completely detached from its body structure. This is a Class A medical emergency." Jake looked down at his shoulder, confused by the description. His arm was still attached to his body, it was just out of position. The joint had popped out of its socket, but everything was still connected by muscles and ligaments. He had seen much worse injuries on Earth that were treated and healed completely. Through the containment field, Jake could see medical teams rushing toward the chamber. They were bringing equipment he had never seen before, including what looked like portable surgical units and tanks filled with healing fluid. The response seemed completely out of proportion to the injury, but Jake was beginning to understand that different species had very different ideas about what constituted a serious medical problem. Dr. Helen Carter, the human medical liaison who had arrived at the station a week earlier, came running into the chamber. She took one look at Jake sitting calmly on the platform and immediately understood what was happening. "Everyone please remain calm," Dr. Carter announced through the public address system. "I am the human medical specialist and I can assess this situation properly." She approached the containment field and spoke directly to Jake. "How are you feeling? Any numbness in your fingers? Any trouble breathing?" "I feel fine, Doc," Jake replied. "It's just a dislocated shoulder. Happened to me twice in high school. Hurts a bit, but nothing terrible." Dr. Carter nodded and turned to address Instructor Veltar and the gathered medical teams. "I need to explain something about human physiology that may not be in your medical databases. This type of injury, while painful, is not life-threatening for humans. Our joints are designed to handle this kind of displacement." Veltar's compound eyes focused on Dr. Carter with obvious confusion. The scanning equipment clearly shows complete structural failure at the connection point. The bone has separated entirely from its socket. In any known species, this would require immediate surgical intervention to prevent permanent disability or death. "That's exactly what I need to explain," Dr. Carter said. "Human joints work differently than most species you're familiar with. We evolved on a world with dangerous predators and variable environmental conditions. Our bodies developed the ability to handle significant physical trauma and continue functioning." Jake watched as Medical Director Thixol arrived with an even larger emergency team. Thixol was a tall, gray-skinned being with 3 eyes and tentacles instead of arms. The medical director began scanning Jake with instruments that beeped and hummed as they analyzed his condition. "The damage is extensive," Thixol announced gravely to the assembled group. "Complete separation of the major arm bone from the shoulder socket. Significant displacement of surrounding tissue structures. In most species, healing this would require surgical reconstruction and months of regenerative therapy. The human may never regain full function of the limb." Jake tried to interrupt and explain that humans could fix dislocated joints manually, but every time he spoke, his words seemed to be misunderstood by the translation system. The aliens appeared to think he was becoming delirious from trauma, or perhaps going into shock. Dr. Carter raised her hand to get everyone's attention. With your permission, Medical Director, and with the consent of all present, I would like to demonstrate standard human medical treatment for this type of injury. The chamber fell completely silent except for the humming of medical equipment and Zixith's distressed resonance. Jake realized that what happened next would change how every alien at the Institute thought about human capabilities. Medical Director Thicksall stared at Dr. Carter with all three eyes, the tentacles that served as arms moving in slow, thoughtful patterns. Around the chamber, dozens of alien students and medical personnel waited to see what would happen next. Jake sat quietly on his platform, still holding his dislocated arm against his body, trying to understand why everyone seemed so terrified of what was, to him, a routine sports injury. Dr. Carter, Thicksall said slowly, I have reviewed the medical files for all human students. Your species' physiology is noted as being similar to standard mammalian structures. The injury we are observing should require surgical intervention, according to every medical protocol in our database. Dr. Carter nodded respectfully. I understand your concern, Medical Director, but human beings evolved under conditions that required us to handle physical trauma differently than most species. We developed mechanisms for dealing with joint displacement that don't exist in other biological systems you're familiar with. She gestured toward Jake, who waved awkwardly with his good arm. On Earth, this type of injury is common in athletic activities. Human medical practitioners learn to treat it as a routine procedure that takes only a few minutes to correct. Instructor. Veltar's compound eyes focused intently on Dr. Carter. Are you suggesting that humans possess some form of regenerative ability that can instantly heal bone fractures? Not regeneration exactly, Dr. Carter replied. More like repositioning. The bones haven't broken, they've just moved out of their proper position. Human joints are designed with enough flexibility to allow this kind of displacement without permanent damage. Jake could see that his roommate Zixith was still resonating with panic, the crystal structure of his body showing more stress fractures as the minutes passed. The two Vega students were huddled together, their antennae twitching nervously. Even the medical staff seemed uncertain about what they were hearing. Dr. Carter approached the containment field around Jake's platform. Jake, I'm going to explain to everyone exactly what happened to your shoulder and how we can fix it. Is that okay with you? Sure, Doc, Jake replied. Whatever you think is best. Dr. Carter activated a holographic projector that displayed a three-dimensional image of human shoulder anatomy. The projection showed bones, muscles, ligaments, and the ball and socket joint structure that allowed human arms to move in multiple directions. The human shoulder is one of the most flexible joints in known biology, she began, highlighting different parts of the structure. It allows for an enormous range of motion, but that flexibility comes with a trade-off. The joint can become displaced under certain conditions. She manipulated the holographic image to show what had happened to Jake's shoulder. The ball-shaped end of the upper arm bone had slipped out of the cup-shaped socket in the shoulder blade. Surrounding muscles and ligaments were stretched but not torn. In most species, Dr. Carter continued, this would indeed be a catastrophic injury because your joints are designed for stability rather than flexibility. Your bones fit together more precisely, with less room for movement but also less chance of displacement. Medical Director Thicksall extended a scanning device toward the hologram, comparing the human anatomy with medical records from other species. This degree of joint flexibility would be impossible in Centaurian physiology, he said. Our bones would fracture before they would separate this way. Exactly, Dr. Carter agreed. And that's why your medical protocols call for immediate surgery. But human joints can be manually repositioned by applying force in the correct direction, at the correct angle. She turned to address the gathered students and medical staff. Human beings evolved on a world where survival often depended on continuing to function, despite physical injury. Our ancestors had to escape from predators, travel long distances, and perform physical labor even when hurt. Over millions of years, our bodies developed remarkable resilience. Jake watched as the alien students began to understand what Dr. Carter was explaining. Their expressions of horror were slowly changing to amazement and curiosity. Quinn, his gel-like roommate, was flashing with patterns of blue and green light that Jake had learned indicated intense interest. So you're saying, Instructor Veltar asked, that humans can repair their own structural damage without medical equipment? For certain types of injuries, yes, Dr. Carter replied. Dislocated joints, minor fractures, cuts, bruises, and many other injuries can heal naturally or be treated with simple manual techniques. She gestured to Jake again. What Jake experienced is called a shoulder dislocation. On Earth, it's treated by gently pulling and rotating the arm until the bone slips back into its proper position. The procedure takes less than a minute and provides immediate relief from pain. Thixel's tentacles moved in patterns that Jake recognized as deep concentration. The medical scanners confirmed that there is no bone fracture, no torn arteries, and no damage to major nerve pathways. The displacement appears to be purely positional. That's correct, Dr. Carter said. And with Jake's permission, I would like to demonstrate the standard human treatment for this condition. Jake nodded eagerly. The dislocated shoulder was becoming more uncomfortable as time passed, and he was ready to get it fixed. Please do, Doc. It's starting to ache pretty badly. Dr. Carter approached the platform and spoke to the containment field controls. I need to disable the barrier so I can perform the treatment. I assure everyone that this procedure is completely safe when performed correctly. Medical Director Thixel hesitated for a long moment, then slowly deactivated the containment field. All medical equipment will remain active and ready for emergency intervention, he announced. Dr. Carter climbed onto the platform and knelt beside Jake. She examined his shoulder carefully, pressing gently around the displaced joint and checking his circulation and nerve response. Everything looks normal, she said. Jake, this might hurt for just a second, but then you'll feel much better. I'm ready, Jake replied. Dr. Carter positioned Jake's arm carefully, explaining each step to the fascinated alien audience. I'm going to apply gentle traction to extend the arm while rotating it slowly. The goal is to guide the ball of the upper arm bone back into its socket. She grasped Jake's wrist and elbow, positioning his arm at the correct angle. Around the chamber, every alien student and medical professional watched in complete silence. Even Zixith had stopped resonating, though the stress fractures in his crystal body remained visible. The key, Dr. Carter continued, is to work with the human body's natural flexibility rather than against it. Human muscles will relax and allow the repositioning if it's done correctly. She began to apply gentle pressure, rotating Jake's arm in a slow, controlled motion. Jake felt the familiar sensation of his shoulder joint moving back toward its proper position. There was a moment of increased discomfort, and then suddenly, with another audible pop, everything slipped back into place. The relief was immediate and obvious. Jake rotated his shoulder experimentally, testing his range of motion. That feels great, Doc, thanks. The silence in the chamber was so complete that Jake could hear the hum of the life support systems. Every alien present stared at him as if he had just performed magic. Medical scanners that had shown catastrophic structural damage now displayed readings that indicated completely normal joint function. Jake stood up and moved his arm around to show that everything was working properly. See? Good as new. Zixith's crystal body began resonating again, but this time the sound was different, higher pitched and almost musical. Jake realized that his roommate was not expressing panic anymore, but wonder. The silence in the gravitational disk chamber stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Jake continued moving his arm, demonstrating that his shoulder was working perfectly while dozens of alien beings stared at him in complete amazement. Medical scanners continued beeping softly, confirming that his joint function had returned to normal parameters. Finally, Medical Director Thixel broke the silence. This is unprecedented, the director said, tentacles moving in rapid, agitated patterns. The scanning equipment clearly showed complete structural failure, and now it shows normal function. How is this possible? Dr. Carter climbed down from the platform and addressed the assembled group. What you witnessed is a standard medical procedure that human doctors learn in basic training. But I can see that the concept is difficult to understand if you're not familiar with human physiology. She reactivated the holographic display and began showing detailed comparisons between human anatomy and the anatomical structures of several other species represented at the Institute. Most of your species evolved on worlds with more stable environmental conditions than Earth. Your bodies developed for efficiency and precision rather than resilience. Professor Keltar, who had arrived during the medical emergency, raised one of his 6 arms to ask a question. Dr. Carter, are you saying that humans regularly experience this type of catastrophic injury and simply repair themselves? It's not catastrophic for us, Dr. Carter replied. A dislocated joint is painful and temporarily disabling, but it's completely repairable and rarely causes permanent damage. Human athletes experience dislocations regularly and return to full activity within days or weeks. She gestured to Jake, who was now stretching his arm above his head to show his full range of motion. Jake will probably have some soreness for a few days, but there's no reason he can't continue playing gravitational disc tomorrow if he wants to. This statement caused another wave of amazed murmurs from the alien students. Vorthak's voice came through the speaker system from his protected booth. On my world, if a limb becomes separated from its socket, the individual becomes permanently disabled. We have mechanical replacements, but natural function can never be restored. Dr. Carter nodded sympathetically. I understand. That's why our medical protocols seem so strange to you, and why your protocols seem overly cautious to us. We evolved under different pressures. She expanded the holographic display to show Earth's environment. Images appeared of varied landscapes, mountains, deserts, forests, and oceans. Earth has extreme weather patterns, dangerous predators, and unstable geological activity. Humans survived by becoming incredibly adaptable and resilient. The display showed human ancestors running across rough terrain, climbing trees, and engaging in physical combat with large predators. Our bodies had to function even when damaged because stopping to heal completely would have meant death. We developed the ability to continue functioning with broken bones, torn muscles, and significant injuries. Instructor Veltar approached the holographic display, studying the images with obvious fascination. Your species evolved as persistence hunters, correct? I have read about this in xenobiology texts. That's right, Dr. Carter confirmed. Humans would chase prey animals for hours or even days, running them to exhaustion. This required bodies that could handle enormous amounts of stress and keep functioning despite fatigue, dehydration, and minor injuries. Jake watched as understanding began to dawn on the faces of the alien students and medical staff. They were starting to realize that what seemed impossible to them was actually the result of millions of years of evolutionary pressure that had shaped human bodies in unique ways. Dr. Carter continued her explanation, showing how human bones were designed to bend rather than shatter, how human skin could stretch and heal rapidly, and how the human cardiovascular system could function even with significant blood loss. Humans can lose up to 40% of their blood volume and still survive if they receive proper treatment, she said. Our hearts can continue beating even when severely damaged. Our brains can function with reduced oxygen supply for several minutes without permanent injury. Quinn, Jake's gel-like roommate, pulsed with bright yellow light as he spoke. This explains many confusing behaviors I have observed in human students. You engage in physical activities that would be fatal to most of us, yet you show no fear. We're not fearless, Jake interjected. We just have different ideas about what's actually dangerous. On Earth, a dislocated shoulder is something you might get playing sports. You go to the doctor, they pop it back in place, and you're fine. Zixith's crystal structure had stabilized, and the stress fractures were slowly healing themselves as his panic subsided. Human friend Jake, your body accomplished in minutes what would require surgical reconstruction and months of regenerative therapy for my species. Dr. Carter smiled at the crystal being. And your body can do things that would be impossible for humans. You can process certain types of radiation that would kill us instantly. You can survive in vacuum conditions that would be fatal to any carbon-based life form. Every species has evolved remarkable capabilities. Medical Director Thixel was reviewing data from the medical scanners, comparing Jake's readings before and after the shoulder relocation. Dr. Carter, I would like to request permission to conduct a comprehensive study of human healing capabilities. This could revolutionize our understanding of biological resilience. I'd be happy to coordinate that study, Dr. Carter replied. But I should warn you that human healing abilities might seem even more impossible once you understand them fully. She activated another holographic display that showed the human healing process in detail. Time-lapse images demonstrated how human skin could close wounds within days, how broken bones could knit themselves back together and actually become stronger than before, and how the human immune system could adapt to new threats and develop permanent resistance. Humans can heal from injuries that would be permanently disabling to most species, Dr. Carter explained. We can regrow skin, repair muscle tissue, and even recover from certain types of brain damage. Our bodies are constantly repairing themselves at the cellular level. Professor Keltar was taking detailed notes with all 6 of his arms, recording everything Dr. Carter said. This suggests that human students could participate in physical activities that we currently consider too dangerous for any species. With proper precautions, yes, Dr. Carter agreed. But we still need to be careful about injuries that are serious even for humans. We're resilient, but we're not invulnerable. Jake raised his hand to speak. Doc, should I tell them about the time I broke my leg in 3 places and was back to playing football 6 months later? The collective gasp from every alien in the chamber was so loud that it echoed off the walls. Several students immediately began speaking at once in their native languages, and Jake's translator struggled to keep up with all the different conversations happening simultaneously. Dr. Carter laughed and held up her hands for quiet. I think that's enough shocking revelations for one day. We don't want anyone to faint. But Jake could see that the damage was done. Every alien student in the chamber was looking at him with a mixture of awe, fear, and intense curiosity. He realized that his life at the Institute was about to become very different. Within 3 hours of the gravitational disk incident, Jake discovered that news traveled incredibly fast through the Galactic Institute. As he walked through the corridors toward his dormitory pod, he noticed that conversation stopped when he approached, and students from dozens of different species watched him with obvious fascination. His universal translator was picking up fragments of discussions in languages from across the galaxy. The words impossible healing, structural reformation, and human resilience appeared repeatedly in the translations. By the time he reached his pod, Jake realized that he had become something of a celebrity. Zixith was waiting for him in the common area, his crystal structure now completely healed from the stress fractures he had suffered during his panic. Human friend Jake, Zixith said, his voice creating pleasant musical tones. I must apologize for my reaction to your injury. In my species, such structural damage would mean death or permanent disfigurement. Don't worry about it, Jake replied, settling into his favorite chair. I probably would have panicked too if I saw you shatter into pieces. That is precisely what I mean, Zixith continued. If I were to shatter, my consciousness would cease immediately. There would be no possibility of repair or recovery. Yet you experienced what we perceived as equivalent damage, and simply corrected it as if nothing had happened. Vorthak's voice came through the speakers from his sealed section of the pod. Jake, friend, I have been researching human physiology in the database. The information is remarkable but difficult to believe. It says that humans can survive having major organs completely removed and replaced with mechanical alternatives. Heart surgery is pretty common on Earth, Jake confirmed. My grandfather had his heart valve replaced when I was 10 years old. He lived another 15 years after that. The silence that followed this statement told Jake that he had once again said something that shocked his alien roommates. Quinn pulsed with rapid patterns of light as he processed this information. Your species regularly performs surgical procedures that replace vital organs? Quinn asked, his voice carrying notes of amazement. Sure, Jake said. Hearts, kidneys, livers, even lungs sometimes. We can transplant organs from one human to another, or use artificial devices to replace damaged parts. He was interrupted by a chime from the pod's communication system. Professor Keltar's image appeared on the main display screen. Jake, would you be available to attend a faculty meeting this evening? Dr. Carter has suggested that a presentation on human biology would be valuable for our medical and xenobiology departments. Jake looked at his roommates, who all encouraged him with various gestures and sounds. Sure, Professor. I'd be happy to help. 2 hours later, Jake found himself in the Institute's main lecture hall, facing an audience of nearly 200 faculty members from dozens of different species. Dr. Carter stood beside him at the podium, and Medical Director Thicksall had set up various scanning and recording equipment to document everything that was said. Faculty colleagues, Professor Keltar began, this afternoon we witnessed something that challenges our understanding of biological resilience. Dr. Carter has proposed that we establish a new research program to study comparative healing abilities across species. Dr. Carter activated a holographic display that showed the afternoon's events in the gravitational disk chamber. The audience watched in stunned silence as Jake's shoulder was dislocated and then relocated. Several faculty members made sounds of distress or amazement as the demonstration played. What you're seeing, Dr. Carter explained, is completely routine medical treatment by human standards. but it represents capabilities that appear to be unique in our current database of galactic species. She gestured to Jake, who stood up and waved to the audience. Jake has volunteered to help us understand human resilience by sharing examples from his own experience. Jake approached the microphone, feeling nervous about speaking to so many distinguished academics. Hi everyone. I'm not a scientist or a doctor, I'm just a regular human student. But I guess my body can do things that seem impossible to other species. He looked out at the diverse audience. Crystalline beings like Zixith, insectoid species like Vorthak, energy-based life forms, and creatures he couldn't even begin to categorize. Dr. Carter asked me to talk about injuries I've had and how they healed. Jake began with his first broken bone, suffered during a bicycle accident when he was 8 years old. He explained how the bone had snapped completely in half, but had grown back together stronger than before within 2 months. The audience made sounds of disbelief as he described the healing process. He continued with other examples. A concussion from football that had healed completely within weeks, cuts that had closed themselves within days, and muscle injuries that had repaired themselves with nothing more than rest and basic care. The most serious injury I ever had was when I broke my leg in 3 places during a skiing accident, Jake said. The doctors had to put metal pins in the bones to hold them in the right position while they healed. He activated his personal communicator and displayed X-ray images that he had kept as souvenirs. The pictures showed his leg bone fractured in multiple places, then the same bone 6 months later, completely healed with the metal pins still visible inside. The audience reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several faculty members stood up to get a better look at the images. Others began rapid conversations in their native languages. Jake heard his translator picking up words like impossible, miraculous, and unprecedented in dozens of different languages. Dr. Carter took over the presentation to explain the science behind human healing abilities. She described how human bones were living tissue that could regenerate themselves, how human skin replaced itself completely every few weeks, and how the human immune system could learn and adapt to new threats throughout an individual's lifetime. Humans are not unique in having healing abilities, she explained. Many species can regenerate lost limbs or repair damaged organs. But humans appear to be unique in combining rapid healing with the ability to function normally, even while seriously injured. Medical Director Thixell asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Dr. Carter, does this mean that human students could safely participate in activities that we currently consider too dangerous for any species? With appropriate modifications to our safety protocols, yes, Dr. Carter replied. Humans have different risk tolerances and different healing capabilities than other species. We need to develop guidelines that account for these differences. Professor Keltar stood up to address the audience. I propose that we establish the Institute's first Comparative Resilience Studies program, with Dr. Carter as the director and Jake as our first research subject. The motion was approved unanimously, with faculty members from every department volunteering to contribute to the research. Jake found himself agreeing to participate in studies that would help the Institute understand human capabilities and develop new safety protocols for human students. Over the following weeks, Jake's life changed dramatically. He became the subject of countless medical scans and tests, all conducted safely and with his full consent. Researchers studied how quickly his body healed from minor cuts, how his muscles responded to exercise stress, and how his cardiovascular system handled various challenges. More importantly, Jake helped establish new activity programs that allowed human students to engage in sports and exercises that had been considered too dangerous. The first human-only gravitational disc league was formed, with safety protocols designed specifically for human physiology. Jake's roommates became his closest collaborators in the research program. Zixith studied how different species processed stress and trauma. Vorthak researched environmental adaptations across species. Quinn investigated energy-based healing methods that might complement biological healing. The culmination of the program came when Jake was invited to demonstrate human resilience capabilities to a gathering of representatives from worlds across the galaxy. The presentation was broadcast to millions of beings, showing them that the newest species to join the galactic community possessed remarkable abilities that could benefit everyone. Standing on the stage where he had first explained human healing to the Institute faculty, Jake looked out at an audience that now included beings from hundreds of worlds. "When I first came here," he said, "I thought I was just another student trying to learn about other species. I never expected that other species would want to learn so much about humans." He paused and smiled at the familiar faces of his roommates and professors in the front row. "I've learned that every species has amazing abilities that others don't have. Humans happen to be really good at healing and surviving injury, but we have a lot to learn from species that can live in space or exist as pure energy, or think in ways we can't even imagine." Jake gestured to Dr. Carter, who had become not just a colleague but a friend. "The most important thing I've learned is that our differences make us stronger when we work together. Human resilience combined with Centaurian precision, or vegan analytical abilities, or crystalline computational power, can solve problems that no single species could handle alone."